Wow, second act much. Donald Trump back in the White House already making headlines. We've got a ton to cover today.
Feels like the whole world's kind of watching, holding its breath.
Yeah, what will the Trump presidency 2.0 actually look like? I mean, especially with all the recession talk and...
Right, all that economic anxiety. It's understandable given, well, everything.
And yet the Dow's up?
Yeah, that's got people talking.
Makes you wonder, right? Is Wall Street just in its own little world, or are they seeing something we're not?
Could be a couple things. Maybe it's that classic honeymoon period for markets. They like a little certainty, even if it comes with a side of, let's say, unpredictability.
Uh-huh.
But it could also be some investors are actually optimistic about Trump's impact on certain sectors, like energy. He's already made moves in Alaska on that front.
True, and he's not exactly shying away from other big issues either. CNBC's got live updates on his executive orders, and it's everything from changes to birthright citizenship to rolling back DEI initiatives.
Yeah, those are definitely going to generate a lot of debate for sure.
Yeah.
But what I find interesting is what he hasn't done yet.
Like what?
No new tariffs on day one, at least not according to MarketWatch. That's a surprise.
Yeah. Maybe he's playing the long game this time.
Could be. Or maybe he's realizing trade wars aren't so easy to win.
Right. Learned a thing or two, maybe.
Maybe so. Time will tell.
Well, while we wait to see what he does next, let's look at how the markets are reacting. CNBC saying Dow futures are up a solid 100 points, but it's not just the usual suspects making moves. MarketWatch is calling them the MAGA 7.
The MAGA 7, huh?
Yeah.
It's an interesting mix of companies that some investors think will benefit from Trump's policies. We're talking companies like ExxonMobil, Caterpillar, Lockheed Martin. Their stock's been climbing since the election, and today's no different.
So people are investing based on politics now. That feels kind of, I don't know, risky.
It's definitely a factor, but it's not the whole picture. There are some fundamental reasons why these companies might do well under a Trump administration, too. For example, ExxonMobil could benefit from his focus on domestic energy production, while Lockheed Martin could see increased defense spending.
I see. So there's some logic behind it. But what about the flip side? What about someone like that MarketWatch reader, the one who's 62, worried about a recession, trying to figure out what to do with their savings? What do you say to them in this market?
That's a really good question, and it really underlines how important it is to have a good financial plan. No matter who's in the White House, diversification, a long-term strategy, and maybe some professional advice are always good ideas.
Especially with Bitcoin hitting new all-time highs. Today it reached $109,000.
Wow.
And on the same day, Melania Trump launches her own cryptocurrency. Coincidence?
Hard to say, but the timing is definitely interesting. The crypto market is super volatile anyway. Add Trump back into the mix, and who knows what'll happen.
So we've got the Dow up, the MAGA 7 soaring, and Bitcoin going nuts. It's like everyone's making money except maybe our 62-year-old who's worried about a recession.
Well, remember, market performance doesn't always tell the whole story about the economy or how people are doing. This uncertainty makes it even more important to understand which sectors might be impacted. Like, remember that CNBC report about the potential merger mania in the mining industry?
Oh, yeah, right? What was that about again?
A lot of things are coming together at the same time that's making it ripe for mergers. First, you've got the global push for clean energy that's driving demand for certain metals like lithium and copper, essential for batteries and all that green tech.
Right, the raw materials.
And then you've got geopolitical tensions and trade wars, which are messing up supply chains, makes it hard for mining companies to operate. And then there's the fact that a lot of these companies are flush with cash thanks to the commodity boom.
So it's a good time to be a mining company.
It depends. Like always, there are risks. But for investors okay with a little volatility, it might be worth looking into.
Okay, so we've got the Dow up, the MAGA 7 soaring, Bitcoin going wild, and maybe a mining boom on the horizon. And somewhere in the middle of it all is our 62-year-old investor just trying to make sense of it all.
It's definitely a lot to take in.
No kidding, but I think that's what makes this deep dive so interesting. Right, we're all trying to figure this out together.
Exactly. And the story's just getting started.
Okay, so we've covered a ton about the markets, but let's zoom out a bit. What's the rest of the world saying about all this? I mean, Trump's return to the White House is big news everywhere, right?
Oh, absolutely. CNBC has some really interesting reporting on this, and the reactions are, well, all over the place.
As you'd expect, I guess.
Right. Some countries are cautiously optimistic, hoping for more stability and predictability on the world stage.
Which, after the past few years, I can understand that, I mean, even with all the drama, Trump's first term had its moments of, let's call it, unconventional diplomacy.
Right, exactly. But on the other hand, there's a whole lot of countries who are deeply concerned about what this could mean. Worried about potential disruptions to alliances, trade wars reigniting, and just generally more instability in the global order.
So basically, the world is holding its breath.
Pretty much.
Wow. Okay, so we've got a mixed bag of reactions from the global community. But what about the individual level? How are people's lives actually being impacted by all this? Like, think about that Market Watch reader we keep coming back to, the one who's 62, worried about a recession, considering selling their rental property. What advice would you give them in light of everything we've just talked about?
First things first, I'd say everyone's financial situation is different, so there's no one-size-fits-all answer. But in this case, they need to think about their risk tolerance, their long-term goals, and how inflation might affect their investments.
So maybe selling that rental property isn't the best move right now.
Hard to say for sure.
Yeah.
It really depends on their specific circumstances. They should probably talk to a financial advisor to get a more personalized assessment.
Good point. Professional advice is never a bad idea, especially when you're dealing with this level of economic uncertainty.
Exactly.
All right, so we've talked about the markets, the global reaction, and even given some personal finance tips. But there's one more thing we need to address before we wrap up this part of our deep dive.
What's that?
TikTok. Remember all that drama about it potentially getting banned? Well, it's back online now, thanks to some, shall we say, assurances given to President Trump.
Yeah, that was a wild ride.
Yeah.
What were those assurances anyway? And what do they mean for TikTok's future? For data privacy? For the whole social media landscape? Lots of questions there.
For sure, it's a situation worth keeping an eye on.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's a good place to pause for now. We've covered a ton of ground already, and I don't know about you, but my brain needs a little break to process it all.
I hear you. Let's take a moment to digest everything, and then we'll come back and dive into some more of the fascinating details we've uncovered.
Okay, so much to unpack here. But you know what's really sticking with me?
What's that?
That whole TikTok thing, I mean, one minute it's facing a ban, next minute it's back online like nothing happened.
It is kind of strange, isn't it? Like, what kind of assurances did Trump get, and what do they mean for TikTok going forward? For data privacy? Really makes you think.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But while we're talking about things that make you think, let's go back to those MAGA 7 stocks. Market Watch teased them. But now it's time for the big reveal. You ready for this?
Hit me with it.
Okay, drum roll. We've got ExxonMobil, Caterpillar, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, U.S. Steel, Freeport McMoran, and wait for it, MyPillow.
MyPillow.
Seriously.
No joke.
Yeah.
Apparently, CEO Mike Lindell's a big Trump supporter, and that's been enough to send the stock up. I guess some investors are betting on a Make America Sleep Again rally.
Well, that's one way to put it. It does raise an interesting point, though. Are we in a market now where political alignment is everything?
Right. Like, should your portfolio match your political beliefs? I don't know about that. Yeah. It's a tricky one. But I think it's important to remember that while politics can definitely move markets, there are usually some fundamental factors at play, too.
Okay, so break that down for me. Like, why would these Magi 7 companies do well under Trump?
Well, take ExxonMobil, for example. Trump's all about domestic energy production, right? That could create a really good environment for them. And Lockheed Martin. More defense spending under Trump could be a big boost for their business.
I see. So it's not just about blind faith. There's some logic behind it, too. But what about the average person trying to navigate this market? Like that Market Watch reader we talked about earlier, the one who's 62, worried about a recession, trying to figure out what to do with their savings. What advice would you give them?
That's a great question. Honestly, in situations like this, professional advice is key. A financial advisor can help them put together a plan that works for them, considering their risk tolerance, their goals, all of that.
So basically, no matter what's happening in the White House or with the Magi 7, sound financial planning is always a good idea.
Exactly. It's about making smart choices, not letting emotions drive your decisions.
Got it. But speaking of making smart choices, let's talk about the global picture. What are the implications of a Trump presidency for the rest of the world?
Well, CNBC has some great reporting on this, and as you might guess, reactions are pretty mixed.
I can imagine.
Yeah, some countries are kind of cautiously optimistic, maybe hoping for a bit more stability on the world stage after, everything that's been going on.
Yeah, after the last few years, I can see that, even with all the controversies, Trump's first term had its moments of, let's say, unconventional diplomacy.
Right, exactly. But then there are a lot of other countries who are seriously worried about what this could mean, concerned about alliances falling apart, trade wars starting up again, and just generally more instability in the world.
So basically, the world is holding its breath and watching.
Pretty much. It's a wait-and-see situation for a lot of folks.
And it's not just about the political stuff either, right? Think about the climate crisis. Trump's got a history of downplaying climate science and pulling out of international agreements. What's his return going to mean for global efforts to tackle climate change?
Yeah, that's a big one. And what about cybersecurity? Human rights, international aid. There are so many areas where Trump's policies could have ripple effects way beyond America's borders.
It's like throwing a rock into a pond. The ripples just keep spreading.
Exactly. And it's going to take time to see how it all plays out.
Well, while the world waits and watches, let's bring it back to something a bit more down to earth.
Yeah.
That CNBC report about a potential merger mania in the mining industry. Why are mining companies suddenly trying to buy each other up?
Well, there are a few things happening all at once that are creating a perfect storm for mergers. First, you've got this global push for clean energy, right? That means a huge surge in demand for certain metals like lithium and copper, essential for batteries and electric cars and solar panels, all that.
Right, green tech needs its raw materials.
Exactly. And at the same time, you've got geopolitical tensions and trade wars, which are making it harder for these companies to get what they need. Supply chains are messed up. It's a recipe for consolidation.
So it's like the big fish are eating the little fish to make sure they control the resources?
Kind of. But is it a good thing or a bad thing? That's the real question.
Yeah, good point. So what do you think? Good or bad?
Well, on the one hand, it could make things more efficient, lower costs, maybe. But on the other hand, less competition could mean higher prices for consumers,
So it's a trade-off.
like most things in life.
True. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive, from TikTok to the MAGA 7, from global anxieties to a potential mining boom. It feels like the world is spinning a little faster today.
It's definitely a lot to process.
Hmm.
But I think that's what makes it so interesting, right? We're living through history in the making.
Absolutely. And it's not just about watching it happen, it's about trying to understand it, figure out what it all means.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for a quick break. We'll be back in a few minutes to wrap things up and leave our listeners with some final thoughts. We're back, and, after all this, it really hits you.
What's that?
Just how much is connected.
Mhm.
We've been talking about markets and politics and global stuff, even mining. It's
Yeah.
like it's all tangled up together.
It really is. It's like this chain reaction. One thing happens and it sets off a whole bunch of other things. And I think that's what makes this time so interesting, but also so tricky to figure out.
Right. It's like this giant puzzle where the pieces keep moving around.
Exactly. And I think one of the biggest pieces in this puzzle is the economy. Like, what does a Trump presidency 2.0 actually mean for things like jobs and prices?
Yeah, especially with all this recession talk, it feels like everyone's kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Well, one thing's for sure, we're probably going to see more ups and downs in the market. Trump's policies, especially on trade and spending, they tend to create winners and losers.
And all that up and down stuff can be really tough on people, especially anyone close to retirement or on a fixed income. Like that Market Watch reader we keep talking about, remember? Worried about a recession, trying to figure out what to do with their savings.
Yeah, their situation really shows how important it is to understand your finances and have a plan, no matter how old you are or how much money you make. It's about knowing how much risk you can handle, spreading your investments around, and making decisions that'll help you in the long run.
So not just jumping on the latest MAGA 7 bandwagon.
Exactly. Investing shouldn't be like gambling. It's about building a secure future.
Makes sense. But speaking of the future, I keep thinking about the bigger picture, What does all this mean for the world? We talked about how different countries are reacting, but what about the long-term stuff like climate change, global trade, all of that?
Those are all huge questions.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's too soon to know for sure how it's all going to shake out. But what we can do is stay informed and keep asking those tough questions.
Because in the end, it's not just about watching what happens. It's about being part of shaping the future, right?
Exactly. Whether it's through voting or the choices we make every day or even just the conversations we all have a part to play in making the world we want.
Well said. And I think that's a perfect place to wrap things up. This deep dive has been a wild ride. But if there's one thing I hope you take away from it, it's this. Stay curious, stay engaged, and never stop learning.
Couldn't agree more. In a world that's constantly changing, the most important thing you can have is a curious mind.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the news. And remember, keep exploring. There's a whole world out there waiting to be discovered.